If you drink the water, you'll grow an extra toe. The water is so bad, Butte people drink beer. If you think Butte people are bad, wait till you drink the water. These were all quotes about this small mining town, Butte, Montana. Throughout this documentary, our purpose is to debunk such myths about Butte water. In reality, Butte has really clean water, some of the cleanest in the nation. Let's take a look at how such myths about Butte drinking water came about.
Butte's rich history in mining was in full swing by the 1880s. The Anaconda Company began as a merger of independent mines. It became the largest copper mining company in the world. A century later, the Anaconda Company lost its property in Chile. This caused the company to go bankrupt and risk shutting down. It merged with the Atlantic Richfield Company, also known as ARCO, in 1977. Due to the extensive mining in Butte, the underground aquifer was catastrophically polluted by the 1880s. This led to the search for other water sources to supply Butte with drinking water. Water was then taken from the Big Hole River across the Continental Divide to the south, the Molten Reservoir to the north, and the Basin Creek Reservoir to the south of Butte. A pump station was built at the Big Hole River to send water to Butte through an extensive pipe system, which was recently updated. The Clean Water Act of 1972 started people thinking about the injustices to the Butte water and the environment. Montana filed a lawsuit against ARCO for the damages done to the aquifer, and the state won. Montana created a committee to advise on how the large amount of money won in the lawsuit should be spent. The money was placed in a fund called the Natural Resource Damage Fund, or the NRD.
And there's a parallel program under Superfund that allows states to sue a corporation for natural resource damages. And so the state of Montana, beginning in 1983, using this new Superfund law, filed damage claims against ARCO. The Natural Resource Damage Program was set up to manage that settlement, to manage that $400+ million. In practical terms, this means that finally Butte Silver Bow Water Company had the money it needed to begin upgrading its facilities, replace leaky pipelines, and build state-of-the-art water filtration and treatment plants. The Clean Water Act of 1972 was a first step that was applied mostly to surface water and pollution in the United States. But then Congress followed up and passed the Safe Drinking Water Act in 1974. And so it was the enforcement of that law finally in the 1980s that contributed both to that citizen class action suit, but also to the Montana Public Service Commission ruling that required the Butte Water Company to upgrade its facilities.
They were sued for hundreds of millions of dollars because of past damages to the natural resources, and one of those natural resources is groundwater. We have never been able to use our groundwater for drinking water sources, and so Butte has gotten a lot of money from that lawsuit to help deal with these issues that, like I already said, should have been dealt with a long time ago. I guess Butte was challenged from a water system that was owned and operated by the Anaconda Company, one of the largest mining companies in the world for a long time, and it was operated primarily as a delivery system to provide water to its concentration and smelting operations, and secondarily as a municipal drinking water supply.
The money from the NRD fund was used to build two state-of-the-art water filtration plants, one for the Molten Reservoir and the other for the Big Hole River. Both plants have done an extraordinary job of cleaning the drinking water in Butte. There are a few reasons why the water needs to be filtered carefully.
You've probably heard about coliform tests. Coliforms are an indicator of fecal matter. So if coliforms are in the water column, then that indicates that maybe some other things might be in the water too that are fecally transmitted. So that's why they look for coliforms. One of the other threats, cyanobacteria or blue-green algae. And blue-green algae produce neurotoxins, so it's important that they don't get up to high levels. Two other things that are also tested for are cryptosporidium okay, which is a very serious pathogen in some water supplies, and of course Giardia, some people call it beaver fever. It's an intestinal parasite protozoan.
The approach you take in the water business, you have a multiple barrier approach. You've got the natural environment that literally has tens of billions of pathogens that are in the air and in the water. In this case, we're concerned about the water. They begin with where you put your surface water intakes if you have a surface water source. Once you get into your filter plant, the next barrier is the physical removal process. If you look at the waters of the Big Hole River, if you grabbed a glass of that water, it has kind of a brownish color to it. The first thing you do in a treatment plant is you add chemicals to coagulate that color. Water plants operate for the most part by gravity. You settle out the solids. So you add chemicals like alum that will change the electrical characteristics of those particles. And then you agitate the water. You have paddles that slowly stir the water. And so then you induce those particles to collide with each other, and then you often will add a polymer so that when those collisions occur, the particles stick together. So in that process, you take these very tiny particles that won't settle, and you create what's called a flock. You make them bigger, and then by gravity they can settle out. And so then you after the sedimentation process, typically you go through a rapid sand mixed media filter like they have here at the Big Hole treatment plant, where you've got 3 or 4 feet of filter media, sand. The water's flowing down through some sand. In a filter plant, these pathogens are extremely small, and the pore spaces in a filter are actually far larger than the pathogen you're trying to trap. And so it's a process of adsorption in a filter. And the idea is you force those particles to make their tortuous way down through that filter. And in that process, at some point on that trip, they will touch a grain of sand. As they flow through the pore space, they'll touch a grain of sand. And because you've conditioned them with alum typically or some other coagulant and polymer, they'll stick to that grain of sand. And so it's that real delicate adsorption process that holds those pathogens in the filter. Then the water that comes out to the bottom of the filter is, well, it's clean enough. With a filter plant, the water isn't safe to drink until it's also been disinfected.
Although both Molten Reservoir and the Big Hole River are ensuring Butte, Montana with clean water, one water source still has potential problems.
The really big issue remaining for the Butte water supply is contamination in the Basin Creek Reservoir. Now, in sort of theory, the Basin Creek Reservoir is a pristine source of water. It's a high mountain reservoir near the Continental Divide, relatively uncorrupted by any kind of human activity or agricultural use. The problem, though, is global warming and climate change. Global warming and climate change have resulted in a massive pine beetle infestation throughout the northern Rockies, and the pine beetles have killed most of the pine trees in the Basin Creek watershed. When those pine trees die, the needles fall off, they wash into the reservoir, they begin to degrade or decompose and rot, and therefore create this terrible water quality problem. Now, normal kinds of water quality problems, people thought they could treat with chlorine. Unfortunately, when you have a lot of organic contaminants, like these pine needles in a water supply, and you treat it with chlorine, the chlorine chemically reacts with the biological materials, the organic materials, and it generates carcinogenic chemicals. So chlorine treatment alone hasn't worked very well for the Basin Creek water. We really need a filtration plant on that water system. The water, oftentimes in the summer out of Basin Reservoir, aside from perhaps having human health issues, it smells bad, and no one wants to drink smelly water.
But Basin Creek becomes a little more critical, at least it did back in the days when I was manager of the system, because it's an unfiltered water supply. And so you want to keep beaver and other pathogen-bearing animals out of the water, because there's no filter plant to provide a barrier between those pathogens and the population that's drinking the water.
I think we are taking some steps that are going to result in more timely changes in our water system. We're looking at additional operational management of our system that can work with the age of the water that's going through our pipes, which is going to lead to cleaner, fresher water. And then with the construction of the Basin Creek plant, I think once again that Butte will have as clean and reliable water as any municipality. We've gotten 2 out of our 3 sources treatment plants built. We're moving forward with building the treatment plant on the Basin Creek system. In the meantime, we're also moving forward with upgrading and replacing the transmission lines too. They didn't just neglect the treatment plants or the lack of treatment, they also neglected the water lines themselves. And so we've got distribution lines out there that are 100 years old or older, and even the ones that are 50 years old need help as well. And so it's a comprehensive plan that we started replacing the transmission lines back in the late 1990s on an annual basis, and to where we've now replaced over 200,000 linear feet of transmission lines, built those 2 treatment plants at Big Hole and Molten, and now we're going to round things out by taking care of the Basin Creek plant and the distribution lines out there.
There's now an opportunity to use some of that remaining natural resource damage money to build a filtration and treatment plant for the Basin Creek reservoir. It's really important, I can't emphasize this enough, that Butte Silver Bow government act in a timely way to get that NRD money now to build that Basin Creek plant. If Butte misses out on receiving an allocation of money to build that Basin Creek plant, then that cost will have to be borne by the taxpayers and the water users of the city, and that's going to mean that they'll have to float a bond that they pay for through municipal taxes, and they'll also have to pay higher water rates.
Butte has come very far in supplying clean drinking water.
So when we compare Butte water today with Butte water from 40 years ago or 1990, it's a night and day difference. Butte water today is as cleaner than the city water of any place in the United States. In 1990, when I moved to Butte, you absolutely did not drink Butte tap water unless you boiled it. Even better, because it was smelly, because you could see like stuff come out of your tap.
I know when I first moved here in 1994, it was routine to see giardia in the water supply, and there were a lot of boil orders in effect for contaminants in the water supply, or in some cases over-chlorination. I think they have that pretty well fixed up now.
Butte water, it's a myth. I mean, it's a myth that's been wrongfully perpetuated for years. We actually have the water that we drink is as clean as any other city's drinking water. The Berkeley pit has nothing to do with our drinking water, thank God. And neither does the water that comes down Silver Bow Creek. It's one of the most complex drinking water systems in America, not just Montana. And it's, again, as a result of our mining and smelting histories, we go much further from our city than your average city, and draw on those clean drinking water resources here. Now, once we get treatment put in place on the Basin Creek system, we shouldn't be dealing with any water quality issues that every other city in America is dealing with.
It was 1993 that we built the water plants at the Big Hole River and at Molten. And so 20 years ago is when the real change occurred. Prior to that, when the Big Hole River was, during spring runoff and running a big dirty river, you'd see a difference in your tap water here in Butte. But as of 20 years ago, that all changed, and Butte has had as fine a drinking water as any place in the state since then.
With all the evidence provided, this should change the way people think about Butte water. The only question is, will the skeptics be convinced?